Okay, look, we might hand over to Gaia for a moment. She's going to tell you a little bit about MLA's products and things, and then we'll start going on the webinar. Okay? I'll hand over to Gaia there.
Thank you, Josh. Okay. We'll see if I can actually share it. Okay, yes, I can, thankfully. Ok, buonasera a tutti. Spero mi si senta bene. Allora, la vedo un po' sfocata, non so se anche voi. Vediamo se riesco a sistemarla. Come la vedete? Ok, mi sembra a posto adesso. Allora, buonasera a tutti, benvenuti a questo corso di formazione. Io sono appunto Gaia e vi contatto dall'ufficio di Milano, lavoro per MLA e mi occupo delle vacanze studio. Ci piaceva l'idea un pochino di presentarci, presentare MLA e la sua offerta, spesso perché magari appunto chi partecipa a questi corsi magari è stato invitato da un collega che magari e quindi di conseguenza magari non ci conosce a fondo. MLA è un tour operator specializzato in vacanze studio e lavora nell'ambito del turismo educativo da oltre 47 anni. Durante la sua attività ha ottenuto un sacco di riconoscimenti, tra cui anche l'accreditamento al MIM, ex Miuro come ben sapete, e quindi possiamo essere appunto definiti ente di formazione. Tra diciamo quelli che sono i servizi principali sicuramente ci sono le nostre famose vacanze studio di varia durata, quindi dagli 8 fino a passare ai 10, 14, anche 15 giorni, personalizzabili poi anche con dei mini break in capitali appunto di interesse a seconda poi del programma. Le destinazioni sono molto varie. Appunto in questa piccola overview vedete un po' tutti i paesi che andiamo a toccare, quindi dalla Inghilterra alla Scozia, l'Irlanda, ma da poco è uscito anche il catalogo generale proprio settimana scorsa e si sono appunto andate ad aggiungere delle destinazioni, tra cui appunto anche gli Emirati Arabi, il Sudafrica e poi chiaramente anche destinazioni già presenti nel catalogo precedente come gli Stati Uniti e parte appunto dell'Europa. Il catalogo generale dà accesso a altri vantaggi, numerosi vantaggi, come ad esempio per le iscrizioni entro il 20 di dicembre al corso di lingua prepartenza di ben 5 mesi, uno sconto in moneta fino a 300 euro e dei risparmi per quanto riguarda le nostre garanzie, la Zero Pensieri per esempio, che ha un prezzo vantaggioso di 150 euro, che dà appunto delle agevolazioni in caso appunto di annullamento e l'MLA Care Plus a soli 100 euro che invece diciamo alza quelli che sono i massimali dell'assicurazione medico bagaglio. Tra quelli che sono i nostri servizi sicuramente va citato poi anche lo stage linguistico, sicuramente di vostro interesse, viene organizzato ad hoc di fatto con voi docenti e ovviamente con il vostro istituto di appartenenza. Sono soggiorni anche questi di varia durata, da 4, 5, 6, ma anche 10 giorni, anche qui organizzabili in moltissime destinazioni. Anche qua abbiamo preparato una overview per voi, come potete vedere sempre il Regno Unito, l'Irlanda, ma anche destinazioni non anglofone, come ad esempio la Germania, la Francia, e la Spagna. Tra i plus troviamo sicuramente la collaborazione con scuole altamente qualificate, la possibilità di modificare il programma con, ad esempio, sostituendo il corso di lingua con un corso PCTO, quindi abbiamo questa alternativa, ma in generale è possibile personalizzare con percorsi appunto di carriera specifici. La sistemazione può essere sia in college che in famiglia, in questo caso sono famiglie selezionate da noi e questo è un tipo di soggiorno che può essere inserito tranquillamente in un progetto PON e POR. Dopodiché ci piace poi l'idea appunto di venire incontro alle richieste che i vostri studenti spesso fanno, magari qualcuno vi chiede appunto di fare un soggiorno, diciamo un inserimento ecco, scolastico all'estero per un trimestre, un semestre o addirittura un anno e quindi abbiamo pensato appunto di proporre l'High School Abroad. Anche qua le destinazioni sono moltissime, dalla Nuova Zelanda all'Australia, chiaramente gli Stati Uniti, il Canada, ma anche qua ci sono appunto delle destinazioni non anglofone, come per esempio la Francia, la Spagna, abbiamo poi anche la Svezia, per cui sono veramente moltissime le destinazioni, un po' diciamo per tutti i gusti. Anche in questo caso, per questo tipo di programma, abbiamo delle agevolazioni per le iscrizioni entro il 20 di dicembre. Anche qua è compreso un corso prepartenza di 5 mesi, uno sconto in moneta fino a 200 euro e anche qua un risparmio per quanto riguarda la garanzia zero pensieri plus fino appunto a 150 euro. L'ultimo programma di MLA che ci piacerebbe appunto presentarvi è Language Live, che è appunto la nostra scuola di lingue. Abbiamo aperto nel 2020 sempre per venire incontro alle esigenze dei nostri studenti. Abbiamo docenti che si collegano praticamente da tutte le parti del mondo per fare lezione in diretta ai nostri studenti. Sono tutti docenti madrelingua o certificati SELTA e i nostri corsi sono appunto sicuri, affidabili, chiaramente economici e flessibili, che ci permettono di risparmiare un sacco di tempo, un sacco di denaro, proprio perché ci permette di seguire i corsi direttamente da casa. I progressi sono chiaramente garantiti, soprattutto grazie ai materiali che sono stati redatti dal nostro reparto accademico, e chiaramente c'è anche la possibilità di eseguire delle certificazioni e quindi di ottenere delle certificazioni linguistiche. Di base questa è un po' tutta quella che è l'offerta di MLA. Vi ricordo giusto velocemente tutti quelli che sono i nostri indirizzi di posta nel caso aveste qualche domanda, qualche interesse. Per le vacanze studio è vacanzestudio@mlaworld.com, per gli stage linguistici @mlaworld.com. Dopodiché per l'high school abroad è highschool@mlaworld.com e poi per language live, anche qui molto intuitivo, languagelive@mlaworld.com. Vi ringrazio per l'attenzione e diciamo che vi lascio appunto al vostro corso di formazione. Grazie mille.
Thank you very much, Gaia.
Thank you, Gaia.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to kick off our student centeredness webinar. I'll hand over to Kathy, who prepared this, and keep letting us know in the chat if you've got any points to raise. I'll be monitoring that.
Thank you very much.
You will receive a certificate of participation and a webinar handout in the next few days. We generally send those out tomorrow afternoon. So if you don't receive it, email me at Formazione. Okay, this handout Kathy's prepared has a lot of important information and even more than we're going to cover tonight. So make sure you don't miss that. Let me know if you don't get it.
Okay, so an introduction. Why don't learners learn what teachers teach? I think this is a question that floats around the staff room in most schools. The traditional English as a foreign language school curriculum and the needs of students in the 21st century don't align. During lessons, the majority of students are disengaged and passive at best. We need to drastically rethink not only how we teach, but also the content of lessons to better suit our students' needs and prepare them for the life outside of the classroom. So, as we were saying before, this is a question that floats around. I'm sure we have all been there before as teachers. And this approach to learning, the student-centered approach, is in answer to many of those questions. Some would argue that curriculum designers are out of touch with young people, and at best the material we use in schools is outdated within a matter of months. Should we involve our learners in decisions over what they learn? We're living in the age of technology and things move fast. Information changes and it is at the hands of the students. Sometimes they're more informed than us about certain subjects. So why not involve them in those decisions? In this session, we'll be talking about student-centeredness, what it is and how we can apply it in the English language classroom.
So this is not necessarily a new issue we've been talking about. We often engage with student-centeredness within our series of webinars, but I think it's about time we focus on this as a task in itself. But I'm sure you've seen our webinars where we're talking about putting the learning and putting the decision of what to learn, even the ways of learning, back in the hands of the students. I think we're going to be focusing on that particularly, but also in ones we've done before and ones we'll do in the future for sure.
Yeah, and we had a lot of questions about whether we could, give more information about this student-centeredness. And so this session today is very much an overview of what student-centeredness is, but it's really about introducing it in bite-sized pieces in a way that you can in your classroom and just playing around with it, really. So by the end of the session, teachers will be better able to educate students on how they learn, empower students to take more ownership over their own learning, and implement and explore a student-centered teaching method. Okay, so we're throwing around this word a lot, student-centered, but what does it really mean? What's the difference between a teacher-centered environment and a student-centered environment? So here we have a kind of diagram that aims to kind of show what a teacher-centered environment is. It is the educator who has hold of the body of knowledge, knows wholly what is right or wrong, and makes all the decisions on what and when to teach. Critics of this kind of environment would say, rather than becoming creative with the language, students are essentially copying and reproducing the language given to them by the teacher. Here we have an image that represents what a student-centered environment looks like. The student-centered view is that students learn best when they are in control of what they learn, making their own decisions on content and goals. In EFL in particular, it follows the theory that language acquisition entails gaining skills rather than learning a linear set of pre-prescribed elements. So in a teacher-centered environment, maybe we decide that the students are ready to learn the present perfect. In a student-centered environment, they're coming to the teacher and saying, we want to be able to talk about the experiences we've had and the experience we haven't had yet. How do we do that? And it's this way that they're setting their own goals. So what does it actually look like? Informed decisions. Students are aware of their own needs and become active participants in deciding what to study. This leads to them seeking out knowledge, often through experimentation and hands-on learning. Big ideas. Teachers are no longer the drivers, but they are the facilitators. When the curriculum is collaboratively designed, the educators can present big ideas, and it's up to the students to find the detail. Formative assessments. Assessments can no longer be gap fills or easy or tests about grammar, of course. Assessments have to now be observation-based, can lead to direct and immediate feedback and come from the work done in groups as a portfolio or through the success or failure, of course, of a project. So we're going to make an example of how this kind of work, talking about task-based lessons and projects. Task-based lessons and projects are a step towards this, as students are responsible for doing research rather than the knowledge coming from a teacher. They are working towards a large outcome and can use whatever skills they have to get there. At the end of each of our MLA task time lessons, students reflect upon what they've learned and how well they did. This encourages them to think about what their personal aims are. Higher order thinking. This whole approach cultivates higher order thinking skills, challenging students to analyze, synthesize, and apply knowledge in meaningful ways, because these are really the skills that they need when they leave the world of the school and enter into the world of work. If we think about what,
I think it's sort of getting them used to becoming a bit more independent too, so that, you know, even if when they need to learn the language in the future, they've got the tools that they can do, you know, maybe without the help of a teacher.
yeah, exactly. And if we have a look at the example here that we have of one of our task-based lessons, these students have a project of thinking about a problem that they think is prevalent in society and how they could create a law that helps to remove that problem. And so they have to go and do the research themselves, work out what kind of thing would work. They're working together in groups. They're then presenting it. And at the end, they reflect, okay, how well did I work in that group in English? How well did I present? Did I explain myself well enough to my peers? If I didn't explain myself well enough, why is that? What language am I missing in English that I need to be able to do that more successfully? So the path of a student-centered approach, what does it look like? How can we apply this in the classroom? And what are the students going through on this path? First, they have to learn how to learn. How is it that the teacher is facilitating this? The teacher must be explicit with the aims and the objectives. I think a lot of us are very used to thinking about our curriculum in terms of the 4 skills. So if we take the example of listening skills, the aim might be to be able to pick out very specific bits of information from a conversation that they have to listen to. And here we're telling them explicitly, okay, we're teaching you how to listen and memorize specific bits of information. They then begin to reflect and notice on their own progress. How well am I doing at the aim that my teacher is asking me to work on? And now the students might be saying, okay, well, actually, I don't think I did very well at that. I understood the overall message, but I wasn't able to pick out specific bits of information. So here the students are noticing the gap. They're noticing the gap between what they can do now in the language and what they want to be able to do in the language. How do we get them there? Well, we need to facilitate this reflection on the learning that they've done. Once they've understood that there's this gap between what they can do and what they want to be able to do, then naturally they will start to create their own goals. Okay, so one of my goals is that I want to be better at listening to 3 or 4 people talk together, because that's really where the problem is for me in picking out that information. And here this is a personal goal, and so they're going to be much more motivated to work towards that goal. Here, the teacher goes and raises awareness of the learning process and the strategies. When the students come with a goal, we can help them get there. Okay, well, maybe you want to look at a transcript. Let's remove some of the words from the transcript and see if you can fill them in. Or listen to a conversation with a friend and then ask each other questions about the information you heard. This way, they're going to realize what their other peers are hearing and picking up in the conversation that they're not. And these are all things, these are all strategies to help them with their listening skills. Decide on content and process. Now, here we're beginning to collaborate on the curriculum direction and design, because if the students are making their own goals, that now they can decide how they want to work on those. Again, talking about listening, they might decide that they want to be listening to a conversation about football, or in one of the other lessons, they're learning about law. Okay, so let's listen to some people have some conversations about different topics within law. And again, this all just works on making these students so much more motivated and focused on their learning process. This, of course, then leads to them becoming autonomous in their own learning, and they can research and learn a lot by themselves because they're aware of their of what they're good at and what they need to improve. So this is a path. It's a very long path, and what I mean by that is maybe within 1 year or 2 years with your students, you may only get to this second milestone, reflect and notice, because it takes students a long time to learn how to reflect on their own learning and understand that gap. You could spend, again, 2 or 3 years talking about how to create their own goals, how to create these aims for their own learning path. So, we're certainly not suggesting that you make your students autonomous within one academic year. It's just impossible.
As lovely as that would be.
So how can we begin to introduce this idea in the classroom? Be explicit about the objective of the lesson. Every lesson, tell them what the objective is. It will definitely make them more focused and get them to start to reflect on their own process.
I mean, this is a case of best practice. We always give the objectives right at the beginning of the webinar. So, it's a good idea to start. I mean, I think it keeps the teacher's idea on it too. If you can't think of the objectives, why are you really doing this?
Yeah, very good point. Very good point. Set projects based on current news that students care about. In the handout, there is a great TEDx video of a lady called Shelley Wright talking about how she did just this and naturally made her classroom into a student-centered classroom, and then continued like that with all of the rest of the classes because she found it so successful. Introduce diaries for setting personal aims. This can also work very well for the reflection. If you introduce a diary for the reflection at the end of each of the class, focused on those aims that you introduced at the beginning, they'll get much more used to setting their own personal aims as well. And it's, a fantastic record of how they are progressing over the year. And introduce reflection into the end of the lesson, either through a diary, or you may want to do it in a much more informal way. Just, a Post-it note on the board, and everyone can read each other's reflections. It also gives them ideas, about how they might want to improve or how they've done themselves. And again, in the handout that we'll be sending you at the end of the webinar, we have a couple of reflection exercises in there that you can use for different skills-based lessons. So as we said before, this was a brief overview of the student-centered approach, how you can begin it, how you can implement it in bite-sized pieces into your classroom. We're going to talk just a little bit about a method called CLL. So it's a bit of a peculiar teaching method. It's not for everyone, but I think it's a really, really interesting thing to look at to see if you take student-centeredness to the extreme, what would that look like in a classroom? And we arrive at something that could look a little bit like community language learning, CLL. So communicative language teaching, in a nutshell, is the consensus that through meaningful interactions, students are engaged and therefore learn. Students aren't fed grammatical points, slowly building on their repertoire, but instead deduce meaning and rule whilst performing realistic real-world tasks. Other approaches that fall under this umbrella of CLT are things like the task-based method, where they're working on authentic, meaningful tasks.
Is it correct that in this sort of way of learning, we're sort of mimicking a bit how they've learned their first language, I guess?
Yeah, definitely. It's all about language acquisition. How do you do that naturally? In a CLL classroom, students are encouraged to fully express themselves on whatever topic they see fit, using whatever language they feel confident using. Their utterances are then recast by the educator to be repeated by the student in the target language. Here, of course, we're talking about English. And so the group conversation continues in this way. Pure CLL has no input other than these reformed utterances from the students as they respond to each other's comments in order to continue a conversation, all of which are recorded. The teacher is there only to aid students in expressing themselves in the target language, and therefore the learning is inductive. In essence, CLL, a natural approach, it regards the student as a whole person, with the teacher guiding learning through being aware of having the relationship among the student's feelings, physical reactions, instinctive protective reactions, and desire to learn. So we're 100% fully handing the baton over to the students. They are in control of the topic and the material, and it evolves naturally, having a completely natural conversation. The teacher is only there to aid them in what they want to say in the target language. So what does it look like? Firstly, create a space that's safe and conducive to the students responding openly to each other. Now, this is very important, first and foremost, because it's being recorded, and that could make some students feel uncomfortable, but also because we don't know in what direction this conversation is going to go. And so it's very important that that is a safe environment where people respect each other's opinions and beliefs. Allow them to choose the matter. Introduce the voice recorder. The teacher inconspicuously moves around the outside, aiding students in what they want to say, but having no input on the content or the direction of the discussion, other than helping students form their utterances in English. Once the discussion has concluded, the students listen back to the conversation. The conversation is transcribed and analysed, and a reflection happens. How effective the communication was and what they struggle to express in English. Following this, when they analyze the conversation in stage 6, this is where the knowledge and the experience of the teacher really comes in, because how are we going to analyze it? What elements are we going to focus on? And where do we think as teachers these students need to improve? It may be the organization of a point that was made by a student, using example to strengthen a point or argument, use of phrasal verbs or formulaic phrases in order to sound more natural, adding emphasis with grammatical elements, expanding vocabulary, pronunciation. There's any amounts of things that you could choose to analyze in that conversation that has then been that has been transcribed there. It is quite a peculiar method, and it does, of course, have many benefits and also drawbacks. If we begin with the benefits, students are in control in talking about genuine content. And this is, every teacher's dream, that students are truly engaged in a conversation and using English. Students learn to become critical through reflecting on their own production. So this is a huge part of the student-centered approach. Are they able to see that gap, the gap between what they can do now and what they want to be able to achieve? The analysis stage makes it easy to work on linguistic elements. We know what level our students are. I think this is a great thing to use at the end of a unit, or let's say every 1 or 2 months, because you can really assess the process, the progress of your students. And it's really easy to do because you're not having to do any direct teaching while they're having the conversation. You're on the outside of the circle and you can observe and analyze the students yourself, choosing which linguistic elements to analyze once they have transcribed the conversation. They must actively listen throughout the conversation and must focus on meaning. How often do our students really truly actively listen to each other? If we have a class of 27 children and one of the students answers a question, are the other students really listening? Are they gaining anything from that at that moment? How can we have all the students active at the same time? Self-correction allows the teacher to monitor their common errors. As they ask for help with utterances or how to say something, often there'll be some self-correction in those utterances as well. And it creates a sense of community amongst those peers. These students are so bogged down with so much that they have to learn and take in while they're at school. This is a really nice time for them to just engage in some authentic conversation with each other in an environment that's really safe. However, of course, there are many drawbacks, and I'm sure you're thinking about a lot of them right now. These early sessions with the voice recorder can be very uncomfortable for teachers and students, especially as we listen back and they hear their own voice. But there's so much benefit that language learners can get from hearing themselves speak. At the beginning, it's always going to be a little bit uncomfortable. With no input from the teacher, conversations could be trivial. And in the beginning, they may be a bit trouble. They may just talk about their likes and dislikes, and that conversation might not go anywhere. And that's why you really have to persist with this and just know that the first one might be a little bit of a failure. But if you try it a second time, it's a fantastic tool to have in your classroom. Some classes will not take to the approach. This, I'm sure, is unlike anything that they have done before. The teacher cannot present new language to be learned in line with the curriculum, which is, again, why I said it's nice to use it at the end of a unit and you can assess their progress rather than at the beginning when you're trying to introduce those new elements before they start using them. Many stakeholders will not endorse a pure CLL course with no fixed, measurable linguistic syllabus because we're really assuming that the students are able to make that progress themselves through doing this. And that's why it's nice to introduce it into your teaching practice rather than think that this would be sufficient as an approach to use in your classroom every single day.
But we're talking about something you can add to your toolbox, really, isn't it? You know, it might work in certain cases. In other cases, you might prefer to use a more traditional approach.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And it does, of course, favor listening and speaking over reading and writing. But again, I feel those are some of the skills that perhaps are a little bit harder when you have like a big classroom or limited time to focus upon.
In many cases, you may see that as a positive. You know, focusing on those sort of skills are often the most difficult skills they have, and they're often the hardest skills to teach.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, in conclusion, it's a path. It's a long path to student-centeredness. Time. The tools and strategies we've discussed today, such as active learning, cooperative activities, and personalized learning plans, serve as building blocks for this transformation. Commitment. Such an approach requires a real commitment from not only the teacher, but also the students to take responsibility for their own learning. Shift. A shift from being the sole purveyor of knowledge to becoming a facilitator, mentor, and guide in the student's language learning process. AI. As AI tools become more prevalent in education, the way we instruct will inevitably change, and we must encourage higher order thinking in our students. CLL. The significance of connecting language acquisition to real-life contexts and engaging with the broader community. This not only enriches the learning experience, but also reinforces the practical relevance of language skills beyond the classroom. I think, as was mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, the world of education is changing, and with AI out there, students do have this infinite bank of knowledge and information available to them. So we really do need to change the way we teach.
Yeah, I think it's sort of one of these things that's going to change whether we adapt to it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And adapt to it, the better it is.
Mm-hmm. We must also acknowledge and address the apprehensions of stakeholders, including administrators, parents, and even students themselves, as a pivotal step in this journey. Students don't often feel like they're learning unless you give them this a text or homework or something to rote learn. And so sometimes even persuading the students that when we try these different activities or when we apply a bit more of a student-centered approach, they are learning. They're learning skills and they're learning how to learn, which is, a great tool to give them. By demonstrating the tangible benefits of student-centered instruction, emphasizing improved language proficiency, critical thinking, and cultural competence, we can build support and understanding for this transformative approach.
Sorry, yeah, please let us know if you've got any ideas about future webinars that you'd like us to do. We always welcome your suggestions, whether you can put them in the chat now or email them to me. But we are going to be talking about some, obviously this is connected to almost every session we do. So I think, this is sort of a mantra for this series of webinars of making it more student-centered. So, we're not going to be talking about different issues necessarily as much as just focusing on different areas of this theme. Okay? So let us know. We have citizenship, okay, teaching grammar, okay. Yeah, we've got some webinars about we did one on alternative ways of teaching grammar, okay, which actually was very much student-centered. Okay, so we may revisit that, add some things to that one. Anyway, thanks for your attention. We will send you a certificate of participation and the webinar handout containing all the information and a lot more from today. Okay. Please email me if you don't receive that. I'll always send them out pretty soon after I receive your email. I'm quite excited about our next webinar. It's the first in a series we'll be doing on using ChatGPT. Okay. Next week, we're going to be focusing on prompt optimization. So giving it the best information in the best form that can give you the best output. So join us next weekend, next Thursday at the same time. And I think Kathy will be back with me, and we'll be talking about that. So it's
That's right. Look
really
forward to seeing you
interesting
again
one.
next
So
week.
really tell other people about it too. I think they'll get a lot out of it. Yeah. Anyway, thanks a lot, everyone. Okay? And I hope to see you next week. Okay? Bye.
Take care and have a lovely evening.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.